Good day, everyone. I hope that I have some good news for especially the startup farmers, because I think, like David also mentioned, everybody wants to invest in the larger operations. But before I get to the good news, maybe I want to share some topics or some thoughts that we have around how to fund agri ventures. And let me start by just introducing our business and our group. So the Gravation Group is very much focused on the agri and food value chain, and we are focused on helping to deliver impact and drive food security. So within our group, we have three very distinct focus areas. The first area is where our Gravation side, where we help grow businesses. So we are a management consulting practice, and we physically assist management teams to develop strategies and deploy those strategies that will grow their businesses. Then we have our business as a tool network, where we connect people and businesses that believes that business is the only sustainable solution to Africa's problems. And then maybe the one that everybody is after is our Section 12J fund, which is very much focused on agri and conservation. So we have the world's first rhino fund, but we also have a agri-tech fund, and we are launching some very interesting share classes in the next few months around assets and asset-backed investments. So the first idea that I want to share with especially growing businesses. So this applies to not just startups, but if you're a fast-paced growing business, there is a lot of value in controlling something without owning it. And what I'm talking about is renting more things than you try and buy. Because at the end of the day, part of the challenge that we see in agribusinesses is that agribusiness is normally very capital intensive because it's very asset heavy, which means that if you buy each and every asset that you need to run your farm or your operations, you're going to end up with a lot of depreciating assets on your balance sheet. You're going to finance those assets at the longest possible term that the funding provider offers, and you're going to write that asset off at the shortest possible time that SARS allows to create the optimal benefit in a tax context. The problem with that is that the financial gearing on that balance sheet then takes a big hammering, which makes that balance sheet not so attractive for your bridge financing guys or even your retail banks, because providing operating capital, they need to know that you have a strong balance sheet that can repay that loan. The other thing that I personally like a lot about renting rather than owning is that your 100% of your cash flow is tax deductible, which means that if you do that calculation, if you operate in a company, you will get up to 43% of your annual cash flow back just in taxes, VAT and income tax alone. So from a cash flow point of view, if you're a fast growing business or a startup, there's a lot of value in rather renting your assets that you need to run your business. And then I think we have an overall philosophy when we help organizations to grow. We look at their balance sheet, and we have a philosophy or a preference where we say all non-income generating assets should not be owned. It should be financed through an alternative method or an off-balance sheet financing model. So there's a lot of benefit in this, and believe you me, in agri, last week I was on the private property farming show, and we talked about renting sheep and livestock, because it is a thing, and it's a very, very attractive model of growing your livestock or your herd if you are not able to access funding in a affordable way. And that goes for a lot of other things. So try and figure out how to control things without owning it, and it will potentially create the ability to speed up your growth in your agri venture. But then there's also this whole debate around there's not enough funding available, or agri ventures struggling to actually find funding. Now, to be honest, I think that is a little bit of a myth, because there's more than enough funding available. In fact, if you look at the Section 12J capital raising and deployment cycle, the majority of Section 12J funds in South Africa currently deploy less than 50% of their capital raise. So it's not a question of not enough capital. It is that there's not enough investments that actually meets the mandate of a specific fund. And I think that's one of the most important lessons that I potentially want to convey today, is that it is important to not just go to anybody who tells you that they have funding available, but to make sure that you understand what you need and the mandate of the funding provider, and to try and match that up as perfect as possible, because otherwise you're just going to get really burn out by trying to fight funding and receiving a big fat no every time that you try and access that funding. So what I've done is I've just created a little of a table here to try and guide everybody that are looking for funding to say, what is the type of funders out there? And obviously this is not a complete list, but it gives you an idea that there's plenty of funding partners available. And then also, what are they typically looking towards funding, and so that you try and match that need and the mandate a little bit better. We also predict as a company that agri will grow in the number of funding providers that is available to the agri industry, because they will become more and more specialized. If you look at retail banks, for instance, the majority of agri ventures are complaining that it is really difficult to get funding from the traditional banks, because they don't fully understand the risk associated with the underlying investment or operations. So let's start with the top. And maybe this is an obvious one, maybe it's not. But if you're a startup and you still have an idea and you don't have a lot of track records, if you need money, get funding through family and friends, and try and rent as much as possible, so that you can build up a track record with a good credit score. Because at the end of the day, if you start borrowing money from these institutions and you have a difficult time paying it back in the early days, your credit score is going to take a beating, and less of the funding providers are going to have appetite to actually fund you. The second one that's normally also quite easy to access is your suppliers and customers. These days, I mean, Coca-Cola is a very good example, where they want to secure the future of their suppliers. And there are many other clients and suppliers that have a similar attitude towards their producers. And I think it's a good idea to actually figure out who or which of your suppliers and customers actually have that appetite and what they offer. And I believe that we will hear more about equipment funding or funding through vendors later today as well. Then the retail banks, we see that they're still financing land, but less and less of them are willing to finance land, especially not on 100% exposure. So they are at the most willing to finance movable assets and working capital. But then you have alternatives. You have your bridge financing providers, you have venture capital companies, you have government funds and grants, and then you have your very specialized funding providers that focus on things like infrastructure or almost subsectors of a industry like solar plants and stuff like that. But maybe just back to venture capital companies, the important thing to notice there, it's very similar to grants that the government offer. They have very strict mandates. So even if you look at our fund, yes, we finance agri-technology companies, but we have a very specific mandate. And unfortunately, if you don't meet our mandate, it doesn't help that you supply or apply for that funding and you supply a brilliant strategy and business plan. It's not going to allow us to actually deploy our capital with you or into your business. So it's important to understand that mandate before you actually apply, because all you're going to do is you're going to waste a lot of time and energy on applying for a fund or to a funding provider where your situation or your business don't meet their mandate. So what are you to do? What is the way to go about this? And I think this is maybe some of the good news that I want to share. And there's a lot of organizations these days that are more and more focusing on helping, especially agri ventures, find the right funders. So I've just shared some of the examples here that's out there in the market, and I'm not necessarily in depth familiar with all of their services, but if you look at equity partners, or if you're looking for a major equity investment and you want to raise capital through an equity model, then a partner like African Merchant Capital might be a very good service provider that can actually take you through that whole journey. And you don't have to apply to 50 different people or potential investors. They will handle that full process for you. But it's also important to mention that most of these have some sort of ticket size limit that they apply. So Africa Merchant Capital, I know their ticket size is around $10 million. So if you are looking for something in that region or maybe north of that, they will be a good partner. But if you're looking for $1 million, they're not potentially going to be the right partner for you, and you have to find another service provider. Then you have Growbility. I mean, I know they focus heavily on helping farmers and agri-ventures find funding from your traditional banks. So their top management team are all ex-bank managers, so they do understand the traditional bank and their processes quite well, and they will help you find that funding from the banks. But the challenge is, so if you're looking for private equity, there's no value in going to them. Then you need to go and find somebody like African Merchant Capital. But if you're looking for typical working capital from a traditional retail bank, there's no value in going to somebody else, but potentially them, and making them help you. Then you have Farmers Assistant and Dectra. So Dectra is a good example of a company that focuses heavily on accessing grants, government grants, and applying for government grants. Petrus and his team, they know that process, they understand that process, they've done it multiple times, they have a big focus on the agri sector, and somebody like them might just be worth your while to engage when you're trying to access government funding. And then you have Farmers Assistant, who are potentially focusing on equity, banks, and grant money, but they are heavily focused on the smaller and startup type ventures. So they're not focusing on the bigger side as far as my understanding goes. So what I'm trying to share with you is that there's people that really knows their stuff and can help you access funding, but it's important that you also fully understand what you need and for which of these options you actually need to go. So that's in quite a short overview what I wanted to share, and I just want to leave you guys with my contact details. Happy to engage. Please visit our website to understand more about how we can help you and what we offer. And like on the impact fund, there's a apply online for if you're an agri-tech business and you are looking for funds, you can actually apply online, but you're also welcome to contact me directly. And then last thing that I want to leave you with is one of my favorite quotes that from Winston Churchill that says, "To improve is to change, but to be perfect is to change often." And I think in the agri space this next decade, there's going to be a lot of change, and we're going to have to figure out a lot of new things. And as long as you keep on changing and striving for perfection, I think you will make it, and you will have a massive positive impact on our continent. And I want to thank the farmers for doing that, and everybody involved in agri. I think it's important to have you as part of our economy.
Wow, that's very motivational, Sarel. Thank you very much. And I also like the fact that you shared very important resources that people can tap into, and making yourself available. But I just wanted to find out this thing about renting versus owning. I guess it's cultural, right? So if you own a car, you really feel good about it. But if you're just on a long lease, it's not really your car. So I think people feel that they need to own something. So tell me a little bit about this issue about the sheep and the goats. How do you rent sheep and goats? And what rights do you have? Can you throw them on a braai?
So yes, let me start by maybe addressing the first thing about the emotional side. I think you're 100% right. It's a cultural thing, and especially in Africa, it's one of our biggest challenges. Is if you just think about land ownership challenges that we have, it's because we want to own it. The reality is that we're only farming with the portion above the ground, so the soil just enables that. And if you have access and you can control the land, you can farm it and you can make a lot of money without having to own that land. But the important thing that I want to share is we are all inspired by the likes of Uber and Airbnb because they have created these massive businesses and disrupted industries that have been around for hundreds of years. And how did they do it? They did it by simply changing their mindsets around ownership. Uber is the biggest taxi company without owning one vehicle. Airbnb is the biggest hospitality group without owning one piece of land that offers accommodation services.
Yeah.
So the moment that we set our minds free from ownership, growth can happen faster because I don't have to earn all of the capital to invest in ownership. I can now invest in growth, and funding growth is actually much cheaper than funding ownership.
Okay.
And that's a very important thing. So let me address your question around the sheep. So I'm a part-time farmer as well, and I actually own or rent about 800 sheep.
Wow.
So and it's a fantastic model because I pay 25 Rand a month per ewe, and so that's 300 Rand a year. And that ewe produces on average 2 lambs a year for me. That's 3,000 Rand per ewe that I potentially can harvest from that ewe or produce from that ewe. So you make your own calculation if it's a worthwhile thing to rent, because if I had to buy that ewe, I had to go and fork out 2,000 Rand for that ewe in year one, pay all of the interest on top of that, and then have almost no money left to feed it and all of that. So even if there's a drought coming around on my way, I have 1,475 Rand more than the guy that bought his ewes to feed my ewes with.
Okay, so how do you make your money then? So whatever the lambs that come out of the ewe are now yours. Is that it?
Yeah, so you rent the ewe and the offspring is yours. And obviously, the normal rental cycles are 3-year cycles. And if you do livestock, or especially small livestock like goats and sheep, in a 3-year cycle, you can produce 4 lambing seasons, which means 1 lambing season goes to replace all of your ewes so that you have a healthy and young enough herd that can produce, and the other 3 you can sell off.
Okay, interesting. I wonder if we can't rent cannabis plants then.
So interesting enough, that would be one of the things that we would be interested in as a fund, because I don't know if you know, but most of the blueberry bushes in South Africa are rented. They are owned by one company that owns the rights to that planting material, and the farmers are simply renting a pot with a blueberry plant in it, and they are looking after that plant, and the harvest is theirs.
Oh, okay, wow. So that's an interesting mind shift then. Okay, colleagues, do we have any questions for Sarel? Okay, maybe tell us a little bit about the BAT program. Is it what it's called? BAT?
BAT, B-A-A-T, business
Yeah,
as a tool.
yeah,
So it's a very simple philosophy that we drive and which our businesses are all built on. We believe that business is the only sustainable solution to Africa's problems, because the moment that you create a solution at a profit, you create a self-funded solution because it looks after itself.
mhm,
And if you look at the challenges in Africa, is that we we have to fund the solutions every time with donations. So there's no sustainability in donations. I mean, COVID-19 has just shown us again how unreliable donations is, because if the economy dips, people hold back. They don't
yeah,
give them money
yeah,
anymore. And if you generate your own revenue, you then fund your own solution. And what we are trying to do is actually to create these models and or examples that to show people how they can work. So a very good example, and I don't know if you know, um, uh, what is it? There's a lady in West Africa, in Uganda. She actually produced shoes to put ladies through university, and she is currently the biggest factory, shoe factory in Uganda. Um, Liz Buchanan is her name. And she actually is now, like her factory is now the biggest shoe factory in Uganda. And the main reason why they exist is they make profit so that they can put gifted ladies, young ladies through university. And the amazing thing is that story started many years ago. And today her CEO of that company is one of the first 3 ladies that she put through university on that model.
okay, wow, that's yeah, very interesting. Gabriel, Gabriel, you can unmute. Sarel, maybe you can unshare. So yeah, Gabriel is actually in Rwanda. I don't know if you want to, Gabriel, maybe you can tell us the happenings in Rwanda quickly.
Thank you, Professor. Rwanda government yesterday, first of all, I greet everyone, and I appreciate the presentation and good news you bring to Africa and Africans. Rwanda government last week has promulgated the law to assist the local people and international business interested to come to invest in the cannabis. And now they have shared the call for proposal for people looking to submit the business plans, and we have a deadline of 31 January to be able to submit that proposal. So I have heard that you have a scheme of assisting the startup farmers, and would like to hear from you to see how the new farmers can get support, not only for funding, but also for skills, because the cannabis was a prohibited plant. Now we needed to touch on it. Before it was very dangerous to touch on it. So as a law, as a new system, we wanted to know people we can go to ask for support, just to develop first the business plan. Let me start from business plan. Because this business plan is something can give you first the way of direction of where you want to go and how you want to go to. So we wanted to put on side 11,000 hectares of land. Normally, the irrigation will be needed. and also protection. You said it has to be protected. You have to have a fence and some other tools for control. And if you can read the concept note needed by Rwanda government, it will need also the CV of those experts who are already into the system, into the production, into processing.
Okay. So yeah, Gabriel. So I think what we'll do is that I mean, you and I were talking earlier, so we can continue that conversation, but also you can put your email address in the chat box, and people are free to start that conversation. Maybe just before we go to the next speaker, Sarel, just one other question. Are you working across Africa, or is just in South Africa?
So, David, we are working across Africa. Currently, we are only as way up as Zambia, actively engaging with clients. But we have had engagements with clients in Kenya and Uganda before.
Okay.
But we don't have active projects running there now. But currently, our active projects are Zambia and Botswana, Namibia, South Africa.
Okay. And in Notkolo, just coming to you, if you're there and you can unmute. Are you just working in South Africa, or do you have ambitions to work across the continent?
We're currently working in South Africa, but the CCBA group is in about 14 African countries, and we are working on firming up a bigger partnership with the Coca-Cola Foundation. It may not be next year, but I'm sure the year after next, we will start exploring first the SADC countries, and then I've been eyeing a couple of projects in Uganda and Ghana.
Uganda is popular.
That we could partner with, actually, because our local farmers in Uganda are doing better in getting directly into the coke value chain than we are able to do it in South Africa. So there's a couple of lessons I'd love to learn from them, because they've got about a few mango farmers that are already in the value chain. So yeah, not next year, but surely the year after next.
Okay, well, so it's great that we are thinking bigger than just our home countries.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. So Yogesh, thank you for coming through and for taking up the challenge as always. How can we get into this?
Thank you for having us, Doctor.
Yeah. So how can we get into this business when equipment is so expensive? And I think you have the answers. I hope you have.
Yes, some of them. I hope so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, Sarel, for the amazing presentation.